All right. Well, EP1 or episode one of Ship Talkers. I've got my curly headed brother from another mother, Curtis Garrett, on here. We've kind of crossed paths in the industry here, but we have a pretty similar trajectory as far as how the heck we got into this industry. I know for me, my dad was a regional director of operations, started as a dock worker and truck driver for motor cargo, regional carrier that got absolved in that. UPS overnight, getting out a parcel going into LTL side of the fence. And from there, I went over to Bestway. Bestway became Redaway as part of the whole USF group. Flipped over, worked at Old Dominion for a while. Loved working for them, great company. And then went over to the 3PL side, similar to you, bounced out of 3PL. Did a couple years with Cubics, learned a lot over there, and kind of fell and landed over here at MyCarrier when, Bookout and Scheid started this whole deal, employee number two, and it's been a wild ride the last 6 years. So that's me and how I got into freight. I don't know about you. It's more of a family thing, dinner table talk. What about you, Curtis? How'd you wind up in here?
Well, I was thinking as you were saying all that, very similar paths in the operational LTL carrier aspect, the 3PL broker world, the technology world a little bit. So yeah, I've touched those same spots too. Yeah, I started, tripped and fell backwards into an Old Dominion dock job in 2007. My wife's little brother was working there. I was going to school. I was working some seasonal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of upset he was making more money than I was. So, and then we got pregnant with our first child. So I knocked on Old Dominion's door and talked with them. I remember my first interview with the then, he was an ops manager, I think, but he was kind of like the father, the grandfather of the terminal. He kind of just got
Mm-hmm.
involved everywhere. And I remember in the interview, he basically he's like and don't be hiding in the trailers. We know you're doing that. We know you guys are doing that. And I'm like, I don't even work here yet, man. I won't, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was a rude awakening to, the LTL freight world, working in a dock, especially.
Well, I totally get that because when I was at Redaway, we had a lot of the Home Depot freight, and we would just build a wall with the hefty garbage bags, and I would just park back there and kind of take my breaks because I would have it stacked so high you couldn't see from the dock desk on the middle
Yep.
all the way through. And then the same thing when I would hostle, I would park all the trailers with enough space to drive behind them, so I could park between the fence and the trailers and just take a little break.
Oh yeah. There's all the tricks there. We had in my terminal, we had a trailer that was just, it wasn't trash, but it was essentially that. It was like a bunch of returns to a big
Hmm.
retailer, and they basically just, I don't know what they did with it, but our mo was pack that sucker as full as we can. And it's the terminals ahead of you that sent you trailers. Like if they had any shipments for this company, they would kind of just break it all apart and like distribute it through the whole trailer as topping freight to bump their cube up when they close
Yeah.
the trailer down. So whoever got a trailer, they'd look at the manifest and be like, oh, I see some freight for this company, restack it and stuff. But then you would just push it, ram it into that trailer to pack it in as as far as it would go.
Nope,
Yeah,
I'm
good
with you
times
there,
on the
man.
dock.
I remember all the tricks of the trade. Yeah. That was
Yep.
pretty funny. I know that like when I was at Motor Cargo, we had a reefer trailer that was always at like door four or something. So you'd always run in there for a little cool break, right? Because
Oh yeah.
summertime sitting on a forklift all day, it wasn't the best for your back end sitting here in Arizona when it's 110, 115 on the dock.
Yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure.
cool. Let's jump into the overall episode. That's kind of who Curtis and I are for people listening to this for the first time. We're freight folks, came in here, just needed a job on the dock and kind of just followed the path. Freight's like the mafia. Once you get in, it's hard to get out.
It's true.
And I love this beautiful industry. It is small. I think you hear that a lot. It's a very small world, but I think, as you know, Garrett, 20 plus years in here, truer words have never been spoken. Like you may go to another company, but you're dealing with the same folks. So don't be burning bridges in this industry because they're gonna they're
Right.
gonna keep track.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I think the industry feels bigger than what it is from from the activity, because there's so many moving
Yeah.
parts. It's so complex and dynamic that, yeah, if you just look at like, 65 billion-dollar market versus the size of a truckload or a parcel market, it seems like nothing, but the complexity and just all the, all the activity within. And now I think the speed of change as things are kind of breaking free, which we have a whole list of things to talk through.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
what you just said, like, really sticks out to me because you said, everybody looks at truckload, like, especially if you're like a venture capitalist or you're a money guy coming into this industry, you're looking at all these, emerging solutions, how they're going to solve the problems, because there's a litany of problems you can go after in this industry to solve. Everybody focuses on truckload, right? Because they look at the revenue behind that, the total addressable market, the TAM, and they go, oh, it's, 400 billion or 500 or wherever it's at now.
yeah,
But when you look at LTL, one of the things you kind of said was while the revenue is smaller, right? Market cap's at like what, 60 billion, 70, maybe right in there.
yeah,
The number of transactions, individual transactions that take place in there is what makes it a little bit of a challenge and hurdle because of the spoken hub model. So there's a lot of complexities in LTL. I think people don't understand when you compare it to adjacent modes like truckload or
yep,
intermodal.
yep.
So there's a lot of complexities that take place.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right, and that's what I think can really help you as a carrier. The multiple shipments out of individual locations, having the ability to build up density, consolidate. It's either going to really help you if you get your line haul network and everything figured out well, or it's going to really work against you, and you're just going to drown. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why, and that there's not a big middle area. I think it's clear that you see, high service and lower service carriers.
Yeah. And there is. I think from the outside looking in, it's easy to just commoditize the carriers. Like, well, they all pick up freight, they all deliver it. Some have a bigger network, some have a smaller network. But you and I know, after being in this industry for a long time, it is different. How their costing models are set up, how they determine their cost is different. You know what I mean? The lanes they run, where their terminals are at, are different. So as you get into this, you peel back that LTL onion, there is lots of layers that actually create differentiation
Yeah,
between the carriers.
definitely. Yeah, LTL is the furthest from a commoditized service, in my opinion.
Yes, once you really understand it.
Yeah,
Well, let's hit some of these topics. You and I had kind of
sure.
been riffing back and forth over the week. We'll start with topic number one on this one. It's a pretty big announcement, at least for freight nerds like you and I, is the NMFTA's new ruling
Right.
well, let's be fair. Over the last couple of years, they've continued to migrate more and more items to true density based. But tell me a little bit, Curtis, where do you see this as a different and more, I don't want to say revolutionary one, but a big necessary change that's been announced with what the NMFTA is doing by moving to a standardized density scale?
Yeah, you're right. This has this has been activity that's been relevant for several years now, but this is a huge push forward. They're accelerating the pace of, consolidating separate classification items, like you said, making more of them density based. And it's important to point out, I think, like, this isn't just, a group of people sitting in Arlington, Virginia, deciding like, oh, well, what do we throw in here, and what do we lump into this one? Like, there's a very rigorous, stringent, process behind it. They go out to carrier terminals and customer shipper warehouses. Like, they go see the freight. They collect a ton of data on a specific commodity level, and it's almost like, an academic study or process. Like,
Like a peer
it
reviewed paper, right? They're
yeah
going out there and really getting into the trenches before they
yep,
just make a ruling and assuming that this is what the market will need or dictates.
exactly. That's a good point, though. I don't know how much of a market consideration is taken in. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
you think of market as, as far as capacity and pricing leverage, I think it's just more just from a process and like, as long as they're maintaining, relevancy around cost, risk, packaging space, all these different things that really drive carrier cost,
Yeah.
um, then yeah, that's absolutely how they stay in the mix and keep it relevant. But yeah, no, it's a huge. They basically rolled out a multi year plan to really consolidate the pure number of different classification items. I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe it's somewhere around 8,000 different items now, which if you include all the subcategories and
Hmm.
subclasses, it's up over 200,000. But they're taking, something like 3,000 uh, items or classification, classes out, which will include a lot of those subclasses as well.
Yeah.
And it's needed. The NMFTA is not going anywhere. They're needed. They know this industry better than almost anybody, but just what was lacking, I think, is the customer experience, the user experience of interacting, with their classifications. And anytime, you have one shipper with one commodity and they have to correctly match it out of 8,000 potential matches, like that's not going to work.
Yeah,
Not
what
scalable.
you just said was a nightmare because I know that even when I help shippers out today, and I'll take like a general description because I don't have the NMFC item number, right, which gets you to the exact item category. If you just type in something general, if I go into Class It, right, of which we have a license for, we use it. If you go into Class It, it can be kind of confusing on what it looks like. My item could cross over into 8 different categories based on what you read on face value, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
metal NOI, not otherwise indicated. And then you have different types of components underneath that or nested within that. And the specificity just gets more and more and more and more. But when
Yep.
you generalize a commodity and it just gives you everything on there because it's searching every word within a robust catalog, you're right. The user or customer experience in that needs some work. Leave something to be desired for.
Yeah. And the other thing, and obviously that's important in today's world where, making everything easier to work with through technology um, and better data, that's important. So yeah, I'm really excited. I think the whole industry is excited to kind of see these changes take fruition. I think a large part of that is kind of a changing of the guards there. Um, bringing back Nate Ripke, who's kind of leading that classification charge. He spent a lot of time there early in his career. He's the perfect guy to do it. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I hope they can also start capturing, like they kind of have a one-way mirror right now. Like if whether anybody's logging into Classit or cracking the book, they don't really know where those people go. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in a silo, and they don't know
Yeah.
like what are the more commonly researched categories, subcategories, groups. So having some sort of two-way interaction or kind of like closing the loop to say, okay, this is what they came to us looking for. This is what our product helped them, find and lock in and confirm. And then this is ultimately what they use. Like you need that feedback from a product level.
No, 100%. And I think they'll get there more and more. I think they need to figure out too how to do a better job integrating and offering like a dynamic NMFC lookup into platforms with a more scalable licensing model, right? For, just even platforms like MyCarrier or some of our competitors in the marketplace. I don't think they have a scalable approach for an API driven like NMFC item lookup. I know the product or service exists, but I think the way that they want you to maybe license it by user is harder to get this to the masses so they can get the information they need. And I think while they're doing a really good job moving this to pure density based, I would like to see them with a more customer friendly offering, whether that's from a connectivity standpoint,
Yeah.
or ease of use of the overall system itself.
Yeah, I agree. It, the way they have these classifications written, it's kind of at a first principles level, meaning
Mm-hmm.
that they're basically working with like the pure building blocks of what makes that commodity or product. So example, if you look for, Velcro in the
Mhm.
NMFC, it's actually like technically called fasteners hook and loop or something like that,
Yes.
because
Yes.
at its most granular level, like it is tiny little
Hmm.
hooks looping onto fabric, and so that it just doesn't. That's not how the average brain would think about it, and a
No.
lot of the searching capabilities are still just based on like word matching and association. So, what are your thoughts? I've been thinking a lot lately. Like this seems like a perfect problem to solve with like a LLM, like Chat GPT, conversational AI model. Where
Oh,
it
1,000%. I think there are some wonderful use cases for AI, which, interesting topic. We didn't even have this on here. I know it's a buzzword. Everybody's saying AI driven or AI enabled technology this way, but there is some very, very practical use cases for the large language model within confusing realms, just like this,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like classes and everything else. Because
Yep.
I think it can interpret that from the layman's perspective into, like you said, your first principles approach to really get into what it is. Even though your Velcro analogy is spot on, I would have never thought of the hook and fastener category, right? Because to me, like Velcro is the terminology, like
Yeah.
the name you would look it up by.
Right. And I think they have some brand, commodity connections there. Like
Yes.
you can search for frisbee and it'll bring up flying disc or something like that.
Yes.
And same with Kleenex tissue, that sort of thing. But in
Yeah.
general, it's looking for those very specific keywords. And yeah, to this day, I mean, I'll help clients all the time with classifications, and I'll narrow it down to like 3 or 4, and then I'm rereading them, and it'll be like, multi words, and yep, that's a match, and then you get to the last word and it's like comma, made from fabric, or just something that throws it
Yes.
completely off.
Throws it. Yeah.
It's kind of a letdown.
No, it is.
Um,
I'm with you. So I think there's big customer experience from a user because you're right. It's almost like a medical doctor reading through a medical journal would know exactly what it is and how to interpret that, right? As where they've flipped that over to the general consumer and they're like, yeah, they'll figure it out.
yeah, that
I don't think so, man. It's pretty confusing.
yeah, but it's exciting. I think we're smack in the middle of that transition now, where a lot of this stuff,
Yes.
you know, NMFC classifications, both just whatever's existing and updates, rules tariff updates, service updates. It's all kind of been just we'll update ours as the carrier and they'll figure it out. And
Yeah.
there's a ton of progress, both from the carriers themselves and from third party, companies that are focused on very specific categories. It's just making the dissemination of that information a lot, easier and accessible.
Yeah.
So
Density based, right? I think if you just told me it was density based and you had a uniform class scale, I don't necessarily care about the item number or what it is. I know that based on the size and weight I enter, it's going to render a density number and a pounds per cubic feet. And if it falls between 6 and 8, it's this class. If it's 8 and 10, it's this class, right? That's simplifying it. And that's basically what they're doing.
yeah,
Because I know when I was a shipping manager, I had some commodities that had that kind of like weird subclass where the PCF ranges were broader, and so was the class coverage of those PCF ranges because it wasn't on the standardized density scale.
right.
And like if you're a shipper that has multiple items all over the place and you don't have a system of record where this stuff exists, a clean product catalog, a way to transfer this tribal knowledge, it's hard to put new people in the driver's seat, not expecting them to make mistakes. And those mistakes lead to all kinds of issues down the road.
Yep,
So
exactly.
this is going to segue into our next topic, our kind of chicken or the egg here, right? What came first?
Dimension.
Does the industry have a quoting problem or an invoice problem? And I'll set the stage with this. Like at MyCarrier, we have my invoice hub. I consume invoices. I have millions of dollars in invoices flowing through my platform, and we hover at about a 30% inaccuracy rating, meaning, 30% of every invoice consumed isn't matching the awarded rate quote.
Right.
So is it a problem of the invoice being incorrect, or is it a problem of the upstream quoting being the problem? What do you think, Curtis?
Yeah, I mean, when I think through this, obviously it's complex. You've got different aspects on the shipper side, different aspects with anybody in the middle, any technology in the middle. And then you even have some nuance carrier by carrier. Like every W&I department at a carrier is a little bit different. The way they execute an inspection and make a change on a shipment, the level of evidence and photos and things like that they provide to back it up. So it is a bit like a like a dark, jungle forest that is
Mm-hmm.
kind of scary to walk through sometimes. But I do believe that everything, probably in business in general, but specifically LTL, everything that's kind of hidden up front as a problem or a miss or a gap, it shows itself in the ARAP process. Like
Yes.
every problem rolls downhill to that invoice, right? And so that's definitely one way to look at it, where if it's easier, more streamlined to quote, and part of that is just change management and getting, a big one is like full addresses for locations versus just zip codes. That
Yes.
that causes all kinds of problems, both on just service as well as invoice changes, where yeah, I can get a rate and a transit time and choose, from 20 different carriers based on my zip codes, weight, and class. But if I actually have, full ground level location details, street address, all those other attributes, things that Shipify is working on,
Yeah.
then that's gonna eliminate a lot of that complexity downhill. So I would say it's more of an invoicing problem if I'm going to take a stance,
Mm-hmm.
because I see that being the category of the two that needs more change, I guess. And
Yes.
um, it's I think it's easier to change 50 LTL carriers than several 100,000 shippers, and the level of education and the habits that they've got. But
Yeah.
I'm
And
wrong.
this is where I'm going to take a different stance
Do
than
it.
you, and
Do
that's
it.
perfectly okay. That's why we're here. What I think is extremely lacking in the LTL industry when you compare it to like what's out there for parcel, right? Is the digital connectivity and the easy access to tools that are built in. And let's be fair, there's TMSs have been around for the last 10 or 15 years at different levels, different capabilities, some easy to use, some not to use. But where a lot of them don't do a good job, especially with LTL, is taking the tools that carriers use on the back end to capture this additional revenue, i.e., we have dimensioners, we dimensionalize all the freight, we scale it. One, because they're moving stuff across state lines, got to be DOT compliant and everything else. But two, because they want to make sure that what you're tendering them on that bill of lading is accurate to what they picked up, right? From a classification standpoint to everything else, including the additional services that are required on that shipment. So like to me, it's the customers don't have really good tools on the front end, right? That encourage that behavioral change. Cause I'm with you. The number of shippers always is going to outweigh the number of carriers,
Right.
but they don't have a good vehicle to use. Even the carrier websites themselves, most of them don't even require dimensions to get a rate quote. And now you have this NMFTA ruling coming out that you're going to have DIMs in order to accomplish this and get the correct class and everything else.
Yeah.
So this kind of segues into you've got those dimensionalizers that obviously, like with all new technology, it usually goes to the Fortune 500 or the folks that can afford it first because it hasn't been democratized. It costs more money.
Right.
But yeah, my stance is that this technology is going to get cheaper over time, thereby bleeding into the shipper side of the fence. And I think that's when you're going to get a level of harmony where this can work out, because it's not like I remember working on a dock, and I'm sure you do, before you were required to weigh and dim everything. Production is king in LTL. I'm moving 100 bills a night, but now I have to stop, weigh something, scale it out, make sure it's accurate. Then I have to go dimensionalize it. Then I got to put it in the trailer, close that trailer out, shut it out, and go. Right? Every 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds adds to your production time. And that's something that's heavily measured on a dock. You and I have
Right.
been there. We
Yep.
manage the dock. We know production is king. So I think as more of these tools move into the shipper's hands, you're going to change and encourage that behavior through a much better user experience. And then it will actually drive those costs or reduce those for the carriers if it's done right. And I know that at MyCarrier, that's something we want to do. We want to get accessorial validation on the front end. We get just about full address before generating a rate quote. Now, if we can get like certification that somebody's using a dimensioner, pass that through to the carrier with the photo that's like, hey, this thing is certified, good to go, and create a level of trust and integrity between the shipper and the carrier based on technology being the vehicle that improves these processes. Like, to me, that's kind of the very recent future of LTL that we're heading down the path, and it's starting to happen with something as simple as this NMFTA announcement. So that's where I'm at. My thing is, you got to incent behavior, right? We have kids. If I just ask them to do something without incenting the behavior, the chances of them accomplishing that or changing that behavior are pretty low.
Oh, really? Yours don't?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah, mine.
Yeah, like my middle child that spent $33 on the metaverse yesterday without asking me, and then goes, "Well, I'll pay you back, Dad."
Yeah.
Well, with what money? Well, I do chores around here, and we agreed to get paid, but I'm like, you haven't done them yet, and you haven't got paid yet.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So,
I've spent more money on V-Bucks and Minecraft coins than I'd like to admit.
Oh, I'm with you there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, how do you incent that behavior for the shipper, right? And the same thing comes out. Like, I think part of this NMFTA announcement, and a big push in this industry, is e-bill lading. We now have folks on the e-bill lading committee. You have e-bill lading 2.0 standard, which is good because now you're going to have standardization amongst APIs, how this information is delivered to the carrier.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this, and this wasn't on topic on our call cadence today, but how do you incent the behavior of a shipper to even care to communicate with you in e-bill lading? Because as I see it today, Curtis, and like, plug me if I'm wrong here, looking at this wrong, it really solely benefits the carrier as of today. I could think some soft benefits, like if I'm really selling this to a shipper,
right?
But all the benefit right now, that teeter-totter, the big kids on one end, and that's LTL, is being the main beneficiary of 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, I really like thinking through incentives in our industry because you're right, that drives everything. And historically, if you look back, I do remember when there was no scale, no dimensioner. Then you got one or two scales that were kind of centrally located, and you had to go to them, which would slow you down. Now they typically always have scales on the forklift, so that's
if they're calibrated correctly. We know that there's an issue with the forklift scales depending on how reckless the dock driver is.
Right, yeah. But yeah, that's interesting to me. Like, will that similar path happen with dimensioners where they get cheaper and cheaper, and basically you can have a whole army of them, on a forklift in a driver's hands? I know it's a harder problem to solve because there's more complexity to dimension, versus weighing. But I wanted to mention too, the other thing with this incentive, an ROI topic, dimensioners. I've been asked 100 times by shippers, well, what's the ROI on this? How long will it take me to pay it back?
Yep.
And I don't have a good answer because a dimensioner and a scale, they're truth tellers. They surface the accurate data and attributes of the freight, to make it visible for all parties. So there's going to be a lot of cases where a shipper starts using one and they realize their density goes down across the board, the class goes up, and it's actually going to cost them more money. So I don't have an answer. Like, I don't have the magic bullet answer. I don't know that anybody does. But as far as incentivizing shippers to use EBOLs, to invest in dimensioning and weighing hardware, I think you're seeing now, especially with the EBOL campaign, the carriers have kind of gone to the brokers first, and I think that's an easier sell because the brokers typically get it a bit more. They're more in tune with the carrier's operational difficulties and know the need for the carrier to quantify the freight on their trailer versus the shut, or what was that phrase from back in the day? Cover the floor, shut the door. Those days are over. So no, I agree. It is a bit of a tough challenge still to kind of present an equally weighed, value proposition from a shipper, other than if they can negotiate some sort of pricing reduction due to that saved data entry cost and risk of error going down for the carrier. But I can't confidently say that's a thing that's being offered yet. I know I've heard it from a couple here and there, but yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, selfishly, like, and I know with our model in particular, because we partner with the carriers a lot, like, I think giving them the technology vehicle to improve the behavior is your first best step. You have to give them a tool that's conducive to consuming the information in the manner you want it. Now, whether they have the budget for a dimensionalizer or not, I know, like, when I was a carrier rep, if I had a big enough customer, and I know Mike Bookout, our co-founder, did the same thing, it was worth it for us to go buy them the scale so they could start scaling their freight. So I wasn't dealing with invoicing issues. We were getting paid more on time, and basically good in is good out, right?
Yep.
So I could see in the future like a co-branded program for customers that are larger with either the technology getting much cheaper where it's easier to set this aside, like, okay, $2,000-3,000 for a dimensionalizer, done. I'll spend that. But I think you know this. There's probably about 4 big people in the game with dimensionalizers, and boy, does it run the gambit of price point, right?
Yeah.
You have your Metzlers, Cubiscans, Freight Snap. What was the other one you mentioned to me?
Cargo Spectre.
Cargo Spectre.
Yeah. Metler Toledo,
And
Rice Lake system.
yeah,
Yeah. There's about a half a dozen, I
there's a
think.
handful.
Yep.
Yeah.
And some have like very, distinct capability differences. Some are they have the track where it's a longer footprint, a bigger footprint to be scanned, but it's mechanical because the scanners are moving across the track. Others are just more image based, but the arms and there's no moving parts. It's stationary. So yeah, I agree. I think again, brokers, if they jump on pushing, implementation of dimensioners and scales, it's a win-win for them. The carriers are going to enjoy doing business with them better if there's fewer discrepancies.
Yep.
Even just the fact that the effort is there and the investment's there, carriers know that it's not going to get perfect and no discrepancies overnight, but that's a big signal that you're, as a shipper, in a broker relationship, you're working towards the right thing. And then it makes you stickier with your client, right? Like one of my clients, a 3PL in Georgia, PLP Logistics, they actually do this. They have a Freight Snap partnership, and they're selling this along with all their managed services to all their prospects now. A couple of their current clients have it. And yeah, they got a deal. They give them a cheaper Freight Snap dimensioner. They have kind of this program to calculate the ROI and paying it back, and it's working well, but it's still new.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, but I think it's going to become more prevalent. I know we're very interested in, consuming the information from any one of the dimensionalizing companies out there, because, not one's going to canvas the entire market, right? We live in a free market. Everybody's going to buy different tools and products. So we need to be able to facilitate whatever customers need and get those in here. But for me, I see a very, very nice future state for LTL where more and more customers are using dimensionalizers. You're capturing the picture of the freight, the true dims, the weight. They're certified, which a lot of people don't realize that most of these scaling companies go through a certification process, right? There's only so many sanctioning bodies that really do this certification the right way. So you're going to see that go through. I could see an LTL carrier getting e-bill of lading, getting complete dimensional information, picture of the freight, know that it's certified, get that check mark, like your Twitter X blue check mark. This is certified, shipper of choice.
Right.
And now I don't have to do as much sunk cost on weighing this, inspecting it on my end from a carrier side, because basically I have scored this shipper at a high enough data integrity score. And now I can take e-bill lading to the second phase, which is billing automation, where I don't have to have clerical bodies enter this. I don't have to send this to the Philippines or to Colombia to have somebody transcribe this and get this in as a complete record, not to mention the keying errors that can happen. So I really start seeing costs come out of LTL, the better technology and experience customers have upstream to get the information downstream to the carriers who operate and execute on this. And once you have that trust and that cohesive partnership, I think, man, that flywheel's spinning, and you can really do a lot of neat stuff. And there's going to be hard costs and soft costs that drives out of LTL, but it's going to impact everything, especially
Yeah.
if you get access to earlier information.
Yeah, maybe that is the answer in a way to the what's the ROI to the shipper. Like
Yeah.
maybe it's not in any of these things individually, but it's the sum of all of them. Like think
Yes.
about Uber, right? You don't go call an Uber because you want to get inside a nicer car than you own, or you want to have, a conversation with the most interesting person in the world. All those individual elements of calling an Uber are really hit or miss. Sometimes you get a great
Mm-hmm.
vehicle and a great driver, other times no. But it's the overall, convenience and availability factor, and it just makes sense. But
Yeah.
if you put anything in a silo and say, all right, just evaluating a dimensioner, expense, or just evaluating writing to the EBOL standards, it might be harder to show the ROI on that. But the
Mm-hmm.
sum of all those parts make you a desired shipper for carriers to work with, kind of puts you at the front of the line when the market changes and capacity does get really tight. And if that's the answer, I'm fine with that. I don't think we have
Yeah.
to break out every ingredient and say, this needs to stand on its own merit. It's the shipper kit, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
digitizing and giving them the right tools across a lot of different categories, just to be a better, more efficient shipper that then unlocks access to,
Yeah.
stable capacity and better pricing.
Yep.
I just pulled that
And
out of
and I
thin
think
air. Maybe that's it.
I love it. I love it. Who knows where we're going with this thing? You know what I mean? But with that, and us coming towards the tail end of another quarter here pretty soon, which is crazy. I feel like we're stuck in a time vortex. We've got earnings season coming out. I know Old Dominion just recently released theirs. I haven't seen my Scooter Sayers update yet because I think they were one of the first, but I think XPO's is set to hit in August. You'll see another few trickle out. That coupled with, it seems like FedEx is going to kind of go down the XPO playbook where they decouple like the RXO, XPO offering separate shares, separate companies. I don't think anybody has enough money to buy FedEx. It's going to take dumb money if you want to come out and buy them.
Yeah.
And I don't see anybody doing that, but I do see them, especially as their highest performing, offering within that portfolio of like Express and Ground and everything else. LTL is doing great. In fact, I think analysts are bullish on the LTL industry over the next 3 years, performing very well commensurate to its counterparts. So what are you thinking about the LTL industry as a whole, Curtis, how it's performing when you look at truckload and how low the spot market's gotten on a per mile basis, how other modes are suffering? I think you saw like the JB Hunt Schneider quarterly earnings were pretty much a kick in the you know what. But LTL seems to be kind of motoring along, maybe flat, right? But we ain't down. So
Flat is a win in, if you look
yes.
at just the last couple years, flat's a win. Yeah, I'm eternally bullish on LTL. We're going to have ups and downs. We're going to have, peaks and valleys. It's like any successful stock over time. You look
Mm-hmm.
at the 10-year history of, Apple or Amazon stock price. You zoom in, you can find some catastrophic
Downs. Yeah.
yeah, periods of time on a micro level, but you zoom out and it's consistently up and to the right. And
Yep.
I just think LTL perfectly aligns. If you think about all the things, from a labor, real estate, equipment, assets, all these different categories that
Mm-hmm.
in general are just becoming tougher and more expensive for anybody to get their hands on to do business. LTL, fits perfectly with that. And they're real estate companies, they're, operational powerhouses,
Yeah.
they're technology companies, they're all these things rolled up into one. And if you ask anybody, like, okay, any shipper, would you rather ship in larger amounts? Well, maybe that's a bad question. I'm just saying, like, and I know it's still a sore topic with toilet paper shortages in everyone's mind from COVID, around the just-in-time
Mm-hmm.
manufacturing and stuff. But with technology and data-driven business, it does progress what you can optimize. And if you need to ship a pallet of something or 2 pallets or whatever, and get something there quick and in the right quantity to your customer so their plant doesn't shut down or what have you, that's where LTL is just always going to be used, and I think grow in
Mhm.
that, not to mention the e-com stuff. We've been talking about this for a few years now as an industry. I think like the rise of e-commerce, and we kind of have these buzz topics, but when you
Yeah.
do break it down and look at each component within those different categories, they do tend to line up nicely with LTL carriers and their capabilities, I think.
And it's something you're seeing a lot. I mean, I know like recently I ordered a sauna, an electric dirt bike, like they all delivered via an LTL carrier with a lift gate. More and more of that's coming into our space. What we have access to as a consumer, right, to bring this stuff into our homes and environment and not go to a store for this stuff.
Yep.
I think you're going to see more of this. So that's my next question, Curtis. Like, you have your R&Ls of the world where like maybe 5 years ago, 8 years ago, we're like, why do these goofballs put a lift gate on every truck they got?
Yeah.
And now they're out there, and I see it. They have a big sector of that market because the network is built for it. So do you see equipment types changing or modifying in this industry? Like, I know at Motor Cargo, we had Priority Plus vans, little pickups, if we had to go run a pallet out or get something out. But that was more for, it did make its P&D run. We still need to satisfy the customer's needs, get this thing out to them. Do you see a level of equipment change happening in the very near future with how LTL carriers look at this segment of business? Or do you see them going through more of a partnership model with cartage carriers and little box trucks? Like, where do you see that in the next, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think a bit of both, to be honest. Like, I don't think a carrier is ever going to knowingly trade um, space for speed and agility, meaning that
Mm-hmm.
they're always going to be bumping up against, the regulations of what's the biggest equipment and trailer size that we can use, just partly because line haul is always the most expensive portion for them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's totally space driven. And I mean, there's been policy, I can't think of the word, but there's been like lobbying and stuff forever on just even increasing the pup size from 28 feet to like 29 or 30.
Or to be able to run triples, like, because you can only run
Yeah.
triples in certain states, right?
Yeah.
So,
So as long as that's the focus, I mean, you're always going to have different markets that have different needs just due to the urban congestion and bridge heights and street widths and all these different things. So you look at any national carrier, the most of their straight trucks and smaller equipment is probably going to be in the Northeast and in California
mhm.
and the bigger cities. But overall, I don't. This is my take on this. I don't think we're going to see a huge transition to predominantly straight trucks and smaller, more e-com or residential friendly equipment.
Yeah.
I think space is king, and the more density with consolidating, different shipments into one unit, I think will still kind of drive priority. What
Yeah,
do you think?
I'm with you there. I see somebody coming in, and this has been a problem for a while. I've seen other companies attempt to solve this through connectivity through a singular technology platform, but a lot of these local cartage agents or guys with 3 to 5 trucks, right? They don't have a technology infrastructure, so it's hard to connect to what doesn't exist. But I could see somebody doing this in two separate categories, and this is completely off topic. But I'll give you
There is
an
no on
example.
topic.
Yeah,
Say whatever
I
you want.
think the cartage industry, right, with that final mile white glove stuff, delivering stuff into your house that's bigger than what you would typically get out of, your Amazon or your multi-weight stuff with FedEx or UPS or Speedy or OnTrack, right? Like, pool companies, right? And imagine the Sun Belt in the United States. There is not one like corporate pool cleaning company. And I think somebody's going to go out there and buy all these different pool cleaning companies, lower the cost across the board, have more buying power on chlorine and the chemicals needed, and actually have a corporatized pool cleaning company across the Sun Belt that services everybody. I think the same thing could happen with this cartage industry is somebody's going to get in there, be bullish on this, and they're going to start this company and they're going to have it in all the own major metros, consolidate all these different cartage companies, have technology in place that can now partner better from a visibility perspective with these LTL carriers who are asynchronous, can tell you when it's picking up, when it's in transit, where it's at, when it's going to deliver. I see somebody coming in and doing that, and it being complementary to LTL, and they partner with them. Like, we know this. I mean,
Yeah.
Rack Transport, before CCFS bought them out, right? Anybody delivering to the Four Corners, that was Rack,
Yeah.
right? Somebody's going to do that, just like it's been done in the past with these rural areas in LTL. Somebody's going to own that market, I think, and be the dominant kind of white glove residential inside delivery partner for LTL.
I agree 100%. I don't think it's going to be the LTL carriers, doing that, owning that. I think it's going to be its own category, and like On Track and some of the companies you just mentioned are definitely focused on that. And there's a lot of differences too. Like, in some ways there's more flexibility. Like, think what one of the main things in my brain that correlates with residential or more urban deliveries is they're typically, single shipment deliveries, right? It's one sauna, it's one dirt bike, whatever. So
yeah,
I think there's more flexibility there to kind of use the, like, if you look at the Amazon model and with buying Whole Foods a few years back, and now they have all these, micro warehouses, if you will, that are geographically closer to their customers for self pickups and self service. And, Jimbo in his minivan would probably rather drive down and pick up the bike he bought online versus pay $50 for a delivery or something like that. So
yeah,
I think it'll just allow the core LTL carriers to then focus even more on industrial, what we would say is kind of that stereotypical LTL shipment, 3-4 pallets, 2,000 to 5,000 pounds.
I totally agree with you there. And since we're on the topic of like creation of new companies and everything else happening right now, Curtis Garrett, when was the last time a net new LTL carrier entered the arena? Like a net new carrier.
Net new, before my time, way before my time.
Actually, probably right around our times. I think we're of similar age here.
Who was it?
Conway Freight, 1985.
Okay. Well, that was the year I was born.
Okay.
So yeah, technically my.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, we're 85 babies. Look at that.
Yeah.
That's why you're my brother from another mother. But you told me about this one. I had heard a little bit of rumblings, but when you sent this to me, and I jumped on LinkedIn to actually verify, right?
Yeah.
Trust but verify, and I see it out there. Jack Cooper LTL. They have directors of line hauls, VPs, RVP set up. They have a litany of roles and titles on there.
Yep.
And you got to wonder, is this going to be the first time in almost 40 years we have a net new carrier entering the game? Because you mentioned it, it's so much more. It's industrial real estate, freight liners, or whoever you're going to buy trucks from, Kenworth. They ain't cheap, right?
Yeah.
Drivers ain't cheap, hard to find. So,
well, the only question is, not to get nitpicky, but if it's primarily, if the ingredients and the DNA of this are all from Yellow, from executive leadership, from terminals, is it a net new? I don't know. Is it?
I don't know.
It's somewhere in between. It's not a rebrand. I mean, Yellow as a company is done, but it's not necessarily starting from scratch either. So I don't know, but it's interesting. There's not a lot of public information about this yet. I think there's going to be more coming out later this summer. What I do know that's all publicly available is, like you said, there's just in the past 2 to 3 weeks, there's been several ex-Yellow executives, blinking on LinkedIn. There was a day, I forget when it was, but they all kind of did that the same day and kind of like came out. The only thing that was weird was, and this is always a miss that I scratch my head on, like they didn't even have a legit LinkedIn page for Jack Cooper LTL. So all these executives are adding their position and their company on their LinkedIn, and it's just like, no branding, no anything. Maybe that's because it's still under wraps, but it'll be interesting. It'll shake some things up, especially in a market that is relatively flat, and carriers, especially a lot of the ones that bought more terminals from Yellow in the past 6 months, I mean, I just read Saia's, actually going to turn on more carriers this year than what they originally planned. Like they're still
Mm-hmm.
adding facilities to their network. So from a capacity and a pricing standpoint, yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know, what are they going to be? Do they want to be like a regional carrier? Are they going to go after like that asset light model and handle major metros? Are they thinking they're going to be a full blown super regional, national? Like, what footprint are you going to fit in, and how big is this going to be? I think there's a lot of unknown,
Yeah,
but I'm with you. It's very intriguing seeing this. I don't
yeah,
think we have enough to really. We're just pure speculating here because I don't know enough about it
yeah. I don't
and what
either.
it's going to be, but.
I do. Jack Cooper is a Teamsters company, so it will be union drivers. Um, yeah, I mean, and I'm sure this information's all out there, just hard to find. Like if you just looked at what's left, what's remaining from kind of the pool of yellow properties and terminals, then that might
Mhm.
give a little direction on the region. But I'm crossing my fingers. I'm really hoping that it's somewhere in that legacy Holland footprint, because that
Yeah.
that would make sense for them. I think that's the best, geographical region
Well, that
with
was the best operating arm of that four pack of carriers, right?
right
Between New Penn, Holland,
four
Yellow,
pack.
and Roadway. So like
Yeah,
four pack, yeah.
yeah, totally. And that's where I think they would have the best chances of getting business and or bringing it back.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's there. But yeah, I'm kind of on the edge of my seat to see what happens, see what comes out about this one. Because they were in the news a few months ago. They
Hmm.
did kind of take a run at buying the whole package, and then that got blown apart, and they kind of disappeared for a few months. But yeah, since these folks have outed their new positions at that
Yeah.
company, and hearing some rumblings that some things might be announced the end of July. We'll see.
Which begs the question, where's the money come from? You know what I mean? It ain't cheap to play in this space, not to get started anyway.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
that that one's interesting, and I'm sure this will all come out, right? But I don't think this was just a bunch of former YRC executives pulling together their lunch money to start a company. I think there's a much grander idea behind this.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let's send this off. We've got two more topics left, and we've got they kind of go together here, right? Um, I think you have your API rate aggregators that had come out, your P44s, your Banyans, your can you think of some more that are out there? SMC3 has an offering, um,
Yep.
right?
Um,
And those have always been out there. I can't think of anybody else. Is there a fourth entry to the API game? Those are kind of your three
you've got
primary
some
aggregators.
brand new ones that are being built out now, like Liminal Networks, Providence Solutions, but a lot of the other ones are tied to a TMS product as well, kind of like how Band.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying, where you have a front end, but you got a back end driving it.
Yeah.
So you've got carrier websites is another place to do business. So the APIs I can take and I can build to them. I can kind of customize the workflows, put them into whatever user defined fields are in my ERP, whether that's like a NetSuite or an Oracle TM or SAP's product or Dynamics or whatever you're using, right? So that's one avenue. You have the folks that use LTL carrier websites. You've kind of got 3PLs, and then you have the emergence of like platforms like MyCarrier, which is still an API driven approach, right? With APIs and a front end connected directly to the carrier websites, but using that kind of middle ground.
Yeah.
Where do you see customers migrating to? Where is this great migration going to take place? Are brokers going to get disintermediated? I screwed that up again.
I can't pronounce it either.
Disintermediated.
Yeah.
Don't worry, I'll screw that up.
I'm not
I
even
went to
going
the Derek Zoolander School for Kids Who Can't Read very good.
to
Um, but yeah, where do you see like newer technology? Right, I think we're just in the beginnings of. There's a lot of your legacy tech platforms out there that have been around for a while that were kind of pioneers of our space. But I think now you're getting settlers that are moving in because those pioneers blazed the trail.
Yeah.
Curtis, where do you see this changing? Where do you see customers moving and migrating to, and this landscape changing because of technology?
Well, first of all, I'm really enjoying kind of the Oregon Trail analogy here.
Yeah.
Pioneers and settlers. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a very pivotal point right now for LTL APIs because you've got those legacy TMS platforms. You've got, P44 has already been around a decade. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of work and a lot of progress was made, 8, 10 years ago. And then here until pretty recently with the digital council and people kind of, brainstorming and actually building out additional calls for pre-pickup visibility and the EBOL stuff. And there's, invoicing, API invoicing, disputing,
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff is finally kind of becoming a reality and is good.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said anything that's managed through email, like disputes or checking in on an update or something, like if I'm repeatedly emailing the same sort of thing over and over again for different customers, different carriers, like that should just be an API. I don't need to be a human API and write all these long email chains. Um, I think I think we're going to see more granularity and like I think somebody needs to take on and really focus on the rating API component because that's harder to standardize. You really can't. Every carrier has different.
Multi commodities are the bane of my existence with the rating API, right? So
Right.
what I call nested commodities. I have a single handling unit, and imagine I ship to like Dollar General, and I have all these different commodities nested under a single handling unit,
Yeah.
right? Of different classifications. And when you send that over API, there is no real clean way to do this.
No.
Some carrier websites don't even do this very well when you enter it on their side of the fence. So, like, to me, I would love standardization around that and
Yeah.
just say anything that's a nested commodity like this, can we just go with the density classification of the entire handling unit? That's the class. We rate it as one, but like, depending on how the APIs are mapped and what people are doing, they'll see 4 line items. And by the time it gets to the carrier, they think it's 4 handling units.
Yep.
It's just 4 line items, which throws the rating off, which throws everything off in their internal systems.
Yep.
So like
Right.
that's one that's just irked me for a long time.
Yeah, I
Is
agree.
that end of it? I would love a level of API standardization in this industry that we all agree to, right? And it is what it is.
Yep. And then you think about like accessorial rating. There's a lot of carriers that can't even rate their own accessorials. There's a lot of gaps
Mm-hmm.
and holes because I think part of the reason is the business, pricing operations, they make changes to rules, tariff, and pricing agreements, and that just changes a lot quicker than what the technology team can keep up with and updating and building these APIs. So, and then you throw, like I remember a couple years ago, some carriers started throwing in the height as a dimension in charging overlength for as well.
FedEx did that.
Yeah,
I know that was one.
I wasn't going
Yeah.
to name names, but I think there was at least one more, but I forget who it was. But yeah, like stuff like that. That's a fairly complex, API change and especially the change management of receiving things in the right format.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's always going to be a bit of a lag, but instead of it just being talked about at a high level and like grouping everything together, do you have LTL APIs or do you not? Like it should be, we should all become better and more knowledgeable at this and kind of ratchet down a level. And in some cases, maybe I don't need a tracking API because I'm a shipper that I just want to get it on the truck and I really don't care as much when it gets there. But I want the rate to be right up front. So there's all these different combinations and nuances. I It's interesting. I think some of the better like LTL API functionality that I've seen is native to a TMS where they built their own connections. They're doing more
Mm-hmm.
with the data that they get back from carriers. Because when you think about the mass aggregators, they have to standardize at least within their realm, their
Yes.
ecosystem.
They have their own challenges, right? And you got to look at this. Like if you have a middleware like a SMC3, Banyan, P44, whatever that is, I think there's two culprits here. You have carriers that are evolving APIs or they'll make changes. I don't think sometimes they do the best job of going, okay, I made this change. Have I contacted all these different partners or platforms that connect to me? Understand how that's going to work, am I going to be the brightest bulb in the tree when I make this change? How do I operate in this market or network? Right. And then you got on the other end, can they even facilitate or make that change, or they'll make like a mapping delegation on their end without reaching out and saying, hey, how does this impact you? Or can I stick this in this user defined field? And then you get the right hand not talking to the left hand. And then ultimately, the customer who leverages this experience is the one that kind of suffers because there is a break in that link of the chain.
100%. Yeah. I just honestly see it as like we've got LTL APIs 1.0, and we can thank, Banyan and P44 and all the companies that have moved us from 0 to 1. It's just time to take it to 2.0. And that means it's a lot of different things. There's like you were just saying, the communication around not only the direction of where they're going, but also the actual updates when they happen. I've experienced it personally, and I've heard this a lot. Carrier A they'll roll over their next API evolution or version, and like nobody was told, or not everybody was told. So stuff just
happens all the time. And I can tell you just from our experience with it. Yeah.
So like
it's
if you think about an app on your phone, I can pick up my phone, maybe an app I rarely use, once a month or whatever. I click it, it's gonna update quickly before I can open it. And then I can see like release notes. I know exactly what's changed on that app, even though I don't care because I rarely use it. Yet in LTL, we're all, using these APIs thousands, millions of times a day across the industry. And there should at the very least be like release notes like that. That's look at any tech product, tech company. I think we need to kind of look outside our industry a bit and see, as we're getting more technology and data driven, we kind of need to see like, okay, this is the norm. This is a standard, have a change log, have release notes, have updates. And if people are doing it in LTL, then it's hard to find because I don't really know about it.
No, and I don't think it really happens, to be honest with you. So I think two things can come out of this. I think typically how LTL carriers have dealt with kind of platforms or technology providers or even 3PLs that connect to them is you kind of assign a sales guy to that, right? And the sales guy kind of manages that relationship because there's revenue flowing through there. So I get that at your first principle level, as you would say it, why you did it with a sales guy. But I think there's more of a case to have an individual that treats these different vendors, marketplaces, platforms as a partnership guy that is understanding the business case so that when changes are made, he can take that back for the technology case, right? Because there's a business owner and business case, and then there's the technology use case of what do I have to do to execute upon this? And I think you need those two roles very tied out. You need one that is outward facing for your organization, dealing with these different marketplaces and platforms, that has a direct conduit to your technology team, your internal, CIO, CTO team that is going to execute upon this vision to make sure you guys are talking and in sync.
Yeah, like a delivery manager or a product manager.
Literally like a product manager.
We need more go-between people from the tech to the business. Absolutely.
Yes. So I'm with you there. Leave me with this, Curtis Garrett. Leave me some words of wisdom on LTL general rules tariffs. I think they're good, bad, and ugly all at the same time. They're all a little different. And you had a beautiful little LinkedIn comment the other day about making it more like, was it an Apple agreement? Is that what you had in there? Or like a T's and C's?
Terms and conditions. Yeah, I think we need.
Yes.
It'd be great to. I think the point I made on that post was, I book a flight with Delta. I buy a product or an app from Apple. I really don't have to read the terms and conditions. They don't. They're more for the fringe exceptions, like they're into the spectrum. Like obviously, it's a liability thing. Every company needs to have that in order to not get burned and closed down. But it shouldn't be something that comes into almost every transaction, in my opinion. Like it should be easier to do business and properly quote, get invoiced correctly, be confident in your price and service and all that. So I think some sort of separation of church and state in a way. Like get the accessorials out there, get anything that's service driven, and then just leave it as here's kind of your legalese, your terms and conditions, and managing for the extreme exceptions. But it's in my mind similar to the NMFC topic. Like nobody should have to scroll through a 200-page PDF document to find one little
another use case for AI.
Right.
Large language model to read your general rules tariff while you're in flight in a workflow to know,
right.
Hey, cubic min, cubic max. Hey, you're going to get in trouble for this. You may want to insure this because this is the lowest price per pound they offer. Right. There's all kinds of use cases you can find within a language model and doing this the right way. Just don't use AI as a buzzword, in my opinion. Do it the right way, build it in and make it scalable so that it's delivering value to the consumer.
Yeah, agree. Start small with AI. Like I don't give a crap at this point for some AI bot to come in and do all my customer communication and all these critical things. Like I'd rather it tell me the right NMFC class or the whether I should buy cargo insurance or I'm fine with the liability. Like let's use it in these very small specific use cases, and then I think it'll be the sum of all those things that drive more general AI influence in the industry. But that's where I kind of roll my eyes a bit. Like we have all these companies now just leapfrogging, in my opinion, to let's just replace people. Like not that they say that, but let's have AI write emails and kind of.
Maybe that's what C.H. Robinson's doing by laying off half of their sales force. I don't know.
Maybe AI can sell too. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like start small, build up. I think that's what in a highly complex industry, these are my words of wisdom, actually. So don't start on the macro side and try to take on these massive problems. Start small, fix it, find a solution that makes sense for everybody, that's going to be scalable and going to last, and check that box and move to the next thing. And before you know it, like you're going to have handled a lot of the low hanging fruit. And that's what I'm excited about. I think we are going to see that. I'm building stuff. You guys are building stuff. Yeah, it's improving quickly, but we don't need any AI brokers out there yet.
No, it's not there yet. I get frustrated enough yelling at Alexa and Siri, right? So I don't need to be talking to anybody else. I have enough frustrations with that. Well, Curtis, I love it. This locks in our EP1. Episode 1 is done. We're going to commit to getting one of these out a month. As the appetite picks up for more of these, we'll obviously do more. And I would love, like in comments or whatever, topics for the future. I've got some ideas. I think next month we kind of dig into the pricing aspect of this on both the shipper side and carrier side. I think a lot of shippers are kind of interested on, what do I ask for? How do I ask for it? What do I need to furnish? And how do I go to bat to kind of negotiate? I think it's a lost art form in our industry. And I think it's something that you have a wealth of knowledge on. So unless I hear from the people that are going to listen out there, I think we'll peel the cap back on that and dump into pricing on our next episode.
Yeah, that works. This will be awesome. Like we've talked about for months now. Love this format. Love just bouncing ideas off. Ship talkers and dock walkers. Maybe we need a name extension too, or a slogan.
There we go. Ship talkers and from dock walkers to ship talkers.
Maybe that's it.
There you go.
Yeah,
that's it. All right, Curtis. Well, we're all wrapped, man. I appreciate it. I don't think we got to do anything.